How many of you have felt like, look, I've tried helping my child or student create a purpose and they forget it in like a day? Or how many of you have responded badly to a child's, I can't do this, I want to give up attitude, or maybe just not even known how to respond? Today in episode 8 of Leveling Up, we're going to talk about how to coach children toward their purpose. You will learn new ways to think about your role in this process, and you're going to come away with actionable steps that you can start using today to empower your learner. There's also going to be a ton of giveaways in this episode that you can print off and use again today. Are you ready? Let's level up. This is Leveling Up, a podcast for educators, parents, and leaders of children who are interested in empowering learners in our schools, homes, and communities. Let's level up. Welcome back to Leveling Up. I'm your host, Emily Crapo, and I have our lovely Katie Broadbent with us today. I introduced her in the last episode, but if you didn't get a chance to listen to the last episode, Katie is a fantastic human being. She is the famous Adventure Kate in our treasure hunt reading program. She is a speech language pathologist. She is the head of learning at Prenda, and she is a mother of 4 beautiful children. And she has a lot of insights to share, and I'm excited to have her on today. And in fact, after this episode, Katie is going to be the new host of the Leveling Up podcast. And I'm so excited for you guys and for the opportunity you're going to have to listen and learn from
I'm
this.
so sad for you guys because Emily has done an amazing job with this podcast.
Yes.
So big shoes to step into.
Oh, you're going to do a great job. So today we're going to talk about coaching, how to coach children toward their purpose. So last episode we talked about why purpose was so important. And we're going to get into how this looks, sounds, and feels like in this episode. So Katie, in your mind, how do you coach a child toward their purpose?
I love that question. So we do this in Prenda microschools all the time by talking about the child's future me. And that's an activity and language that we use with kids to help them expand their viewpoint. Kids are very in the now, and our job as adults and as guides and as inspiring, helpful adults in their lives is to kind of help stretch their vision a little bit. Mm-hmm. So we use this concept of a future me to help them become more and more accountable to themselves, because all the decisions you make now affect your future self. So when you make a poor decision now, you're really making the life for your future self really hard. And as soon as they can make this tie, they start to have a way more powerful self-control and goal setting and motivation. All sorts of good things happen. But as far as like how we get there, my favorite way to kind of think about this is actually a concept called the Hedgehog Principle. And it's from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And imagine 3 circles like a Venn diagram, and there's a cute little triangle in the middle that kind of looks like a hedgehog if you draw feet on it, which is funny because in our last episode we had a purpose of being a hedgehog farmer, so this ties in really well.
Purpose and hedgehog.
Yes, so if you imagine these 3 circles, and we'll make a little printout for you and put it in the show notes so you can have a little reminder. The first circle that you would draw would be, what are you good at? Right? So kids are in this process of developing their talents. They don't know what they're good at yet, right? Like I might try hacky sacking and I'm going to fail 100 times and feel like I'm not good at that. But if I try 102 times, like maybe I'm like developing a talent here. And some kids are naturally good at some things right off the bat and there's no struggle. So, we kind of are coaching them and observing their talents. But that's a really important question for kids to kind of have on their mind and for us to be observing as helpful adults in their lives. What are they good at? What are the natural inclinations of this human? I oftentimes think about that story about how in education, it's kind of like we've decided that the only forms of intelligence are like math and reading and these. There's not like a broader sense of like intelligence and talent that's equally valued in the world. And this is kind of equated to having like telling an elephant that he's no good because he can't climb a tree like a monkey, or like he can't swim like a fish, so he's like not as important because only like swimming is important. And so having this broader view of intelligence and talent is really important to go into any adult-child relationship with. So asking, what are you good at? I wouldn't ask, hey, what are you good at? Like to a child. The question that I would ask them is, when have you felt really powerful or capable? So when they just feel like, yes, like, I'm so glad it's like math facts time, or like, I'm so glad that we're playing this game today because I'm good at it. Like when do you have those feelings? And have them brainstorm, have like a class or family brainstorm around that. And have them, when you're doing this, it's really important that you participate. You're not just interviewing them. You have to model it as well, to where you're saying, here's what I think I'm good at and how I use these talents in the world. And you can also do this in books when you're reading stories. It's like, oh, how did this character, like they had this talent and here's how they used it in the world. So you're calling it out all over the place. So that's the first circle, is what are you good at? The second one is, what do you love? And some good questions here are, what were you learning or doing the last time you lost track of time? Or what are you curious about? That's my other favorite question. And then, my other favorite question is, what do you hate, or what makes you mad? Because you can have a positive motivation, or you can have a negative motivation. Like personally, I hate illiteracy. And that's why I went through the great work of building treasure hunt reading, because I really hate that so many kids struggle with reading. So I was motivated to build that solution for the world. Not that other people haven't also contributed to that, but that was what was on my heart. So that's what I did. So that's for, what do you love? And then the third question is, what does the world need? My favorite question for this is, what are the problems you see in the world that you don't like, right? So I see a lot of people who are sick, so that might motivate me to become a doctor to fix that problem. So these are the three circles that I would kind of coach around. And those are some helpful questions that you can use to both observe and like elevate what you're seeing in a child, and also like elicit from what they're seeing of themselves.
I love that. And once they've created this idea of their future selves, then we take the role of being their accountability partner. And Katie, you shared something really profound in the fact that when you're working with children, they don't have their prefrontal cortex fully developed. Mm-hmm. And your prefrontal cortex is what does all of your executive functioning, right? Your prefrontal cortex, I can't say that word today. Your prefrontal cortex can project your future and where you want to go. And it does your long-term goals and your planning and your self-control. Mm-hmm. And because that's underdeveloped in kids, Katie, you brought up the point that we, as their helpful adults, need to be that prefrontal cortex for them. Can you go into that a little bit for us? Yeah,
of course. So a lot of people will, when I start talking these crazy ideas about talking about 4 and 5-year-olds about purpose and like what, all of these big ideas, then they try it and they try it in a way that they haven't really bought it in yet. So they don't try it with a lot of like confidence or enthusiasm, which is normal when you're trying something new. That's understandable. So like it doesn't take, and the kids are like, I don't know what you're talking about. I want to color, or like, I just like want to play video games, or like whatever. And so they feel like, that idea flopped. You can't talk to kids about purpose, but that's kind of like saying like, well, we can't talk to babies because they don't talk, right? It's like, well, we talk to babies so that they will develop the skill of talking. And the same thing, like, well, kids can't project themselves. Like they don't even have like neuroscience and MRIs backing this up, that like they can't project themselves into the future as well as adults can. It's like, well, but if we treat them like they can't, then they won't develop the skill. And so if we treat them like they can and have this constant conversation with them all the time about purpose and about their goals and how their decisions now affect their selves later. I do this little activity with my kids sometimes where I'll tie an action, like draw a picture or write a word or something on a paper and tie it to a string. And then on the other end of that string, I tie like the result to that. And we do like cause and effect fishing, where it's like, oh, I'm going to choose this cause or like this decision. And then like, it's like emptying the dishwasher or something like that. And like, they like reel in the effect of that. It's like, oh, my mom's happy and our house is organized and like, I feel responsible. It's like, oh, good. Like I want to do this because that's the result. And so it kind of helps see that like decisions now are tied to results, and building this cause and effect is really important. And when your kids are really little, they can only tolerate a short cause and effect window. Essentially, it's like, oh, like, yeah, you did this and then this happened. Like, what was your result? In my house, we always, instead of like interpreting reality for our kids, we just say like, did you get a good result or a bad result? And then they'll say like bad result. And then I just say something like, do you like that? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, so like, what could you have done? You know, like you're scaffolding this. You're a tour guide in their life of like pointing out cause and effect and now things and future things to help their prefrontal cortex develop that. And it's going to be a total train wreck the first time you talk to a kid about this. You're not going to have any idea what you're talking about. But over time, when you kind of built like an environment or an ethos around this idea, they kind of grow into that. And it's remarkable how soon they can grow into that when you build that for them.
And another model that I like as thinking about being the accountability partners or the coaches of our children as we're trying to help them coach, as we're coaching them toward their purpose, is this model called the growth model, or the grow model, excuse me. And it's a circle. And we're going to attach a model to this in the show notes as well. So, but you start off with their goal. Where do you want to be, right? And they can't answer that question unless they know what they want to be, right? Unless they have a purpose, right? But where do you want to go? How would you like your home to be? Or how would you like math to go? Or how would you like, you know, whatever they're struggling with. And then you go to the R, which is, what is your reality? What is this looking like right now? And then you go to the O, which is, what options do we have? And then your W is your way forward. And so again, just with this idea, building on Katie's idea of being their prefrontal cortex, you're scaffolding the dialogue or the way forward for children who don't have that ability in their prefrontal cortex.
I love that framework because it's totally scripted, like a prefrontal cortex. That's like prefrontal cortex textbook, essentially, like what your adult brain is doing for you all the time and helping you problem solve and things like that. But because the child has an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, you can come in and model that. And what that looks like often is kid is struggling in math and they're frustrated. And whenever anyone is struggling and frustrated, like completely write off any participation of the prefrontal cortex that they could have had. It is shut down. Right? So like you're going to come in there and that's your role. You don't need to come in there as like the hammer or the whip, like get your math done, like get focused. It's like, oh, like we have a situation here where we're not in our learning brain anymore. And I, as the helpful adult or guide or tour guide or coach, like so many great words to describe that role. I'm going to come in here and scaffold that. Like, oh, looks like you're frustrated with your reality. Let's remember that goal. And then let's like describe the reality. Sometimes we get lost in that reality and make it a really big deal. It's like,
yes,
really, you know, I just am struggling with this math problem or I can't read this word, but it means so much to me in that moment that I can't get my problem solving brain back online. So then the O, which is
your options.
And we want to paint lots of different options for kids. And you can
or have our kids bring up options.
Yeah, totally.
What can you do? Right. So I have a story for this. Can I share the story? Yeah. All right. It's funny that Katie said math and poor math. All the people who love math who are listening to this podcast are like, always. What? Math is always the villain in these stories, right? But again, this is like a math villain story. But I was helping my son with his math earlier this week, and he has some dyslexia, and his whole page of math, he wrote every number backwards. And he was so excited to go play with his neighbor friends, and he showed me his page, and all of you listeners at this time are like, oh no, this is the moment, right? Where you're just like, I'm so sorry. You put a lot of effort and work into this, but this needs to be done again. And when I shared that with him, his fight or flight kicked in, right? Prefrontal cortex just shut down. I hate math. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not progressing. I'm never going to get good at math, right? Like all the feels. He was just like, really upset. And that's a totally normal thing to feel. And before my journey with Prenda, I wouldn't have known what to do. I would have been like, I'm so sorry. I don't know. I don't know what I would have said. I would have probably started talking at him, to be quite honest. But
like a lecture.
I would have
like,
lectured
correcting,
him,
like,
right?
oh, this
like,
is the result. Like,
hey,
you have to...
dude, why are you freaking out, right? I would have, honestly done something like that. But knowing the camp principles, I was able to be as calm as a cucumber during this whole blow up. And I knew exactly how to coach him back and turn on that prefrontal cortex. And it was using camp. And so I started with community. I started with connection, right? I listened. So much of connection. When your child or your student is distressed and they've completely lost hope, and I'm never, and they use those words, I'm never, or this always, that is your cue to just close your mouth and listen, right?
Which is so hard to do as a parent.
It is so hard.
It's a skill. You gotta, yeah.
It is, but it is a skill, and you can learn it. Like it's not a gift. It's not like I just wasn't born with the gift of empathy, right? Yeah. It's just like, okay, this is time to listen. I like to think of it as a wave, and like the emotion will pass. All you need to do is just like stand with your child with the wave, and you can hold them up and like be with them.
Another great analogy there is, imagine like you are riding on a train through a tunnel with your child, and like there's a light at the end. We're going to come to the end of the tunnel, but right now we're in the tunnel and it's dark, and our job is to like stay with and travel along.
And listening with empathy is actually the fastest and healthiest way for them to process all of those feelings.
Negating the feeling doesn't help.
Ignoring it won't help.
Yeah,
it's just, they have to get, I like to think of it as letting them throw up. Like if you tell a child, don't throw up, keep it all in, they're just going to stay sick.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just like, let's get it all out. Right. So during this experience with him, there was a lot of, tell me more. Yeah, you're feeling this. A lot of reflective listening. You're feeling like you're never going to get it. You worked really hard on this, and now you've got to do it all over again. That you feel frustrated about that, right?
Can I add something here?
Please.
One of my favorite authors is Jennifer Kolari, and she talks about this technique that she uses. It's called the CALM method. I won't go into it right now, but essentially, all communication, all this throw up behavior or words or like frustration is communication, right? And the child will continue to escalate it until they feel heard. And so because we're like societally kind of bad at like listening and like creating space for people's feelings, and everything has to be happy all the time, right? It's like if people aren't happy and cheerful and optimistic, like there's a problem that we need to address. We can't just have like normal, okay, negative feelings. We don't have space for that.
Right.
They will continue to just like escalate and escalate and escalate until you give them this. So that's a really important thing to do.
So we get to this point where I sense that he's calming down, right? He has nothing else to say after all of the tell me mores and what else is and reflecting back. We get to this point where he's just like, that's it, you know, and, you know, he takes a deep breath, but he's still kind of just like, oh, he's still sad, right? And so that's when we get to, so we definitely were in reality at that point of the grow model. Like he was just telling me his whole reality. So then we go to options, and this is where we honor their autonomy, right? This is when we say, so what do you think the next step is? Right? And he didn't know. He was just like, I have no idea. And my response to that was, well, would you like me to offer a few ideas? Like, would you be open to that? And because I offered it as an invitation, I was giving him space to then accept it. And if he wasn't open to it, that would have been the end of my conversation.
Yeah. Even if they say no, like if you do it anyway, against their will, like they're not listening anyway.
They're not going to listen to you.
Right? Getting permission and like an invitation is really respectful and makes things go way better.
So in this time, he was open to the options. And so I gave him a few options, and he chose one. And because he chose it, he had the buy-in and he wanted to go with it. But there's been other times where he's just been like, I want to quit. You know, and that's his option. That's his option that he wants to do. It's the only option, right? And Katie and I were talking about this before the episode. And this is going to sound a little scary, but I go with it. I'm like, well, I mean, kid, if there's no way you're going to learn this math concept, then why try? Let's just quit. Let's just quit at And I go there with him. And you know what's so funny? And Katie's experienced this too. But as I go there with him, he's the one who stops it, where he says, oh, Mom, I just need your help with this problem. It's like, okay.
I was catastrophizing a little bit back there, Mom. But I'm ready. Like my prefrontal cortex is coming back online of like not fully developed, obviously, but like what I have, I'm bringing to the table now.
Right.
So,
but that only worked because I had spent so much time listening to him, and he got out all of his anger and frustration and irrational thinking. And so when his option was, I just want to quit. And when I went there with him, he was the rational one at that point because his prefrontal cortex was coming back online. And there was one time when I was going down that road with him where he actually started laughing. He was like, Mom, you're crazy. I can't quit math.
Clearly.
Right.
This is not my long-term best
I know.
interest, Mom.
Come on, Mom.
Think about my future self.
I know. What's the deal? So either way, like when you're at that point where you get to options and whether they're open to accepting your options or whether they do want to quit, go either way with them. Go down that journey and see how it goes. And it might be clumsy and at first, and you might not know what you're doing. But kids are great test experiments to test on because they're so forgiving, aren't they? They're just so forgiving in life. So back to this story. So he said he chose a solution that I offered him. So we were, okay, so this is the plan. I'm going to write all the numbers really big across the page. And when he's really good at mental math, right? And so when we know what the answer is, we're going to look at these numbers before we write down the numbers, right? So that's what we were going to do.
Can I point something out there?
Yes.
You did not abandon him there. Like you were there with him and you were willing to provide some support. It wasn't just a total, like, you got to brute force this. And I like that you thought of a solution that would help him do it correctly and kind of bridge that gap for him. That's very loving. Sometimes when you're in that kind of recovery mode, like you need to be nurtured a little bit. You need that warmth and you need a little hand up. It's when kids get addicted to that and become reliant on that and think I can't unless you. That's when there's this danger of adult doing too much.
Right.
But because you've gone through this process with him, providing a support like that is super helpful.
Well, and the next step when he was working through that, I was energizing his greatness and showing how he was so capable, right? So when you're praising the process, then you're giving him proof that, oh, I really can do this on my own, right? So we open up the page and he looks at his worksheet again after that whole process with all the backwards words. And I can tell that like frustration is coming up again, right? He's just like, he pounds the desk again and and so I took that moment before we started and I retaught him about his brain and what was happening. So we get into mindset. So now we're at the mindset part of camp where I was like, okay, right now, this part of your brain is wanting to fire. It's your fight or flight. And this isn't the first time we've talked about this, right? So I'm not going into a lecture. We want to get this prefrontal cortex up and going. So why don't we take a few calming breaths before we start this, right? And so we did that. And like I was telling you, Katie, as we started working through this math worksheet and he started writing all of his numbers in the correct way, not backwards, I kept saying, oh, I see you're writing so slowly and carefully. Look at you. You can do this, right? I saw you take a deep breath there when you didn't think you could do it. You're really digging deep and trying hard. And when we got to the end of his math worksheet, I asked him how he felt about it because I wanted the reward to come from him, right?
That's so important.
And his response to me was, I feel tired and happy.
That's awesome.
And I thought that was such a profound response because, in Prenda, we talk about climbing our mountains. And when we get to the top of a mountain, we do feel tired, but we also feel happy because we did it, because it was hard, but we dug deep and we did something. And I was so grateful for that experience right before we recorded this because I felt like it full circle encapsulates all these concepts that we teach in camp and how it helps empower learners towards their purpose. And that's how we do it.
Totally. That's how we do it.
Thank you for being on with us today, Katie.
My pleasure.
And next episode, Katie Broadbent will be your host for Leveling Up. So your weekly challenge this week is to try applying the concepts of camp as you help coach a child toward their purpose. Until next time, look higher and level up.
Thanks for joining today. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast and share with a friend. If you're interested in learning more about Prenda, you can check out their website at prenda.com. And finally, the opinions and comments shared in this podcast are not the official opinions and comments of Prenda. The purpose of this podcast is to continue an ongoing conversation about education and empowerment.